Do submissive men actually want relationships? And there's a couple of reasons why I've been thinking about this question. The first is that a few weeks back, I kind of decided to take a step back for a little bit from doing the usual lives. I was adjusting to some new circumstances in my life, but it also gave me time to think about things. And one of the things that I began to think about is, do I really, do submissive men really want relationships, or do they just want the kink? Do they want the experience of being in a female-led relationship, but not the actual reality? And let me explain where my thought process is on this. The reason I began thinking about this question is because what I've noticed is that most submissive men use throwaway accounts. They'll have accounts where they don't show their face. They don't really show like who they are. They'll talk about the desires that they have, but what they won't do necessarily is necessarily bring those desires to the people that they are in relationship with. And I get it, because let's be honest here, most submissive men are going to are understandably going to say, well, wait a minute, if I share openly what I desire and want out there in like the public world, for example, I'm potentially risking my career. I'm potentially risking how other people will look at me and treat me. And I get that. I'm probably one of the few submissive men out there, for example, who's shooting videos like this or has his face up elsewhere. And the reason why, quite honestly, is because I'm out of the closet in a couple of other ways in my life. So it's like if somebody wants to Google me and sees that I'm a submissive man, they're also going to find out that I'm a pagan and an occultist and other stuff. And it's like, like there's no point in me, quote unquote, hiding. But I get for other submissive men why this is the case. But the other reason that I started thinking about this question is that I've noticed that for the most part, a lot of submissive men that I see are pretty much in relationships where they're trying to engage like with a pro dom, somebody who is basically doing femdom or doing domination as a living, or at least as an income stream. And I want to be very clear. I'm not knocking anyone who chooses to be a sex worker or chooses to do that. Like, that's your choice. You have a choice. If that's what you want to do, great. I'm not knocking men who've done that, who've decided to go to a pro dom either, because I've done that in the past. So if I'm tossing stones here, I'd be tossing them at myself too. But I found it curious because I was thinking about it and I'm like, why is that? Because if a submissive man says to me that I want a female-led relationship, right? Is he getting that relationship from being engaged with a pro-dom? I'm not. So there's a couple thoughts on this. One, I want to say that I'm not saying it's impossible for a submissive man to have a relationship with a pro-dom. I'm sure that it can happen and that it does happen. But there's also the interesting component that a lot of times submissive men may be going out and having these experiences on the side because in the main relationship they're in, they're not able to get this desire met, or at least there's a perception that they're not able to get this desire met. And if that's the case, we kind of have to look at that and say, well, why is that? What's going on there? Now, if any of you have any questions or comments as I am going through this, feel free to drop them in. I'm always do respond. I'm happy to connect with you in that way and share some thoughts and ideas live as we go through, but I'm going to continue onwards here. So what I've kind of come to the conclusion of is that for the most part, what we're dealing with is a situation where submissive men aren't necessarily getting the opportunity to fully share with somebody in their life what they want, because there's a perceived fear of abandonment or rejection or just not getting their need met. And why I came up with this particular perception is kind of several-fold. One is an example where, someone shared with me in response to one of my emails. He's like, I hope that someday I work up the courage to tell my wife what I want. My heart went out to him. I get it. And I thought about it like, here's this man who's been in a relationship and he still hasn't shared with her what he really wants. He's afraid of being rejected and abandoned. So undoubtedly, he's probably looked at porn, and he may have gone out and had an experience with a pro dom, and he may have done it in secret. More than likely, he has. So think about that for a moment. Something that he desires, he's had to go out and get somewhere else, not in the relationship that he's in. So there's that piece. But the other piece that kind of strikes me about this is that, let's say you do go to a pro dom. Again, no judgment here, but in a very real sense, you are going in for a very specific experience. The question is, does that experience last outside of that container? Does the relationship continue? And does the relationship exist outside of just the realm of kink? This is the true test of a relationship. If we solely base our relationship on what we want or desire, I think that we'll find that those relationships will be very short term. I say this because typically what I've seen with any kind of relationship that's based on desire is that once the desire is met and fulfilled on some end, it may end up, the fire may go out of it because there's not necessarily anything else to sustain it. But the other end of it is, if we're in a relationship where there are desires, but those desires aren't being fully met, or we're told that those desires don't matter, that also creates a very interesting situation. Something I've seen, or a message I've seen from a few of the pro doms that are on here is, if you submit, your needs don't matter. Like at that point, once you've chosen to submit, your needs don't matter. What you desire and want doesn't matter. And I'll admit, I've had some interesting reactions to that. I've really had to sit with that. And I'm like, well, why am I reacting to that? I mean, I get it ostensibly, like, okay, I've agreed to submit. I've agreed to come to somebody and I've said, I want you to be the leader of the relationship. I want you to create this container and experience around my desires, and I'm surrendering those desires to you, and you're and it's on your terms. You're choosing when those desires are met or if they're even met. And that part I get, but I think the part that I don't really agree with is the idea that, like, well, your needs and wants don't matter. I've found that, like, in a relationship where someone is told that their needs and wants don't matter, it creates a fundamental issue, which is then that person isn't necessarily fully expressing themselves. Like, if I can't share with you what my needs and wants are, or if I share with you what my needs and wants are, but there's a punishment or a consequence for that, then is it really a relationship? This is kind of the question that I ask. And if we look at the phrase female-led relationship, there's 3 words in there. There's female, there's led, and there's relationship. The female is leading the relationship. She's stepping into the role of being the leader. That's important. It's a very important thing. And here's a component of leadership that I also think is important. The leader is able to receive feedback from who she leads. She's able to receive what someone shares, what they want and need. Doesn't mean she's going to automatically fulfill it. It doesn't mean that she's going to say yes, but it does mean, ideally, that she can receive it and that there can be a conversation around it. And I think one challenge that a lot of submissive men have is that if you go out into the dating world and you're looking around and you're like, hey, I'm a submissive man, there are a lot of women out there, and most of those women seem to be saying what they want is dominant men. You go on to to different dating apps, that's typically the message that I've seen in the past, where it's like, well, I'm looking for a dominant man. That kind of makes it harder for a submissive man to find a relationship. And so it makes sense that in a very real way, like if a submissive man finds someone who says, hey, I'm open to the idea of you, I'm open to the idea of domming you, but I'm going to basically dictate that and everything else. And the submissive man is told then, like, hey, your needs don't matter. He may still stay in that relationship because he may be like, well, this is the only chance I'm ever going to get to be in a female led relationship. And so it creates a very interesting situation for that man, because if he knows that, okay, I go out there and most of the women out there aren't interested in being in a relationship with a submissive man, they want a dominant man or they want something else, where does that leave me? What do I do? Now, what I'm going to share with you is that it's really important to get clear on your own value and on your own, like, what you desire and want, because that establishes the baseline for whether or not something will actually happen in your life in a meaningful way. And I will also share that, yes, it is very real and possible to find somebody else. It may mean that you have to wait a little while. It may mean that you have to do some deeper work. And if you're clear on what you really want, it will come out, it will show up. Here's the other piece that I think is really important. It is absolutely essential that there is a relational component to being in a relationship. One of the things that I find that men struggle with in general is that relational piece. What does it mean to be relational? The way that I like to look at it is that we can come out the other side of a situation where there's conflict okay together. We can have a sense of being okay. If I come to you as a submissive man and I say, hey, there's something I need and want, and you tell me that my needs don't matter, that first of all cuts off the conversation right there. Your needs don't matter. Okay. What it really tells me is that you're not able to receive me. And you could argue, well, you're centering yourself. By you sharing what you need and want, that's centering you in the relationship. And the whole point of you agreeing to be in a female-led relationship is that you're giving up control to me. And you're orienting yourself around me and what I want. I get that. I get that that is one version of submission. And for some men, that may be exactly what they want. And what I find interesting at the same time is that if there's no room for communication, it makes it very hard for that relationship to be sustainable. I want to be clear here too, that just because I share what I want and I need, what I want and need, it doesn't mean that I'm automatically going to get it. In the relationship that I'm in, I've shared different wants and needs that I've had with my mistress. She hasn't always been thrilled with what I've shared. She hasn't always agreed with it. She hasn't said, yes, you can have that. And she hasn't just automatically been like, okay, we're going to do that right now. It's been, she's received it. She's thought about it. We've talked about it some more. We've had conversations around it, and we've explored some of our ideas. And sometimes there has been some conflict and tension there. And we've come out the other side okay, because we've been able to talk about it. The key to being in a successful relationship is the ability you have to be able to communicate in that relationship and make it sustainable for the long run. There's a couple of therapists, the Gottmans, and what's interesting about the Gottmans, if you read their work or if you're familiar with them, is that they can predict with about 97% accuracy whether or not a couple is going to stay married or get divorced. Now, why is this relevant here? Well, it's relevant here because it boils down to the communication piece and how people handle conflict and communication. So if I come to you and I express something that I want and need, and you say my needs don't matter, we're essentially shutting things down. And let's say then at that point there ends up being a feeling of defensiveness or stonewalling or criticism or contempt. Those feelings, if they're all there, they typically signal the end of the relationship, because fundamentally what's been lost is a baseline of respect. Now, even if you're into humiliation play and everything else, I'd like to think that at the end of the day, there's still a baseline of respect that goes past the scene itself into the overall experience. Now, for some people, that may not be the case. Fair enough. If that's what you want, again, go for it. But just be really clear that that's what you actually want. So if we have, on the other hand, a relational piece to this, one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to get curious about each other. So I think that submissive men do want relationships. I don't think they just want to have experiences that are specifically focused around kink. But I think that because so much emphasis is put on the kink, it actually crowds out the relational pieces. And yet I can point to like a good example of somebody who is in a submissive relationship. He's been in a submissive relationship for 38 years. He writes here on Substack. And he is very much oriented around the needs and desires of his mistress. And as he puts it, she's the one who basically makes the final decision. But there's some couple of interesting things. He's even said before, well, he's like, my needs don't matter. He's like, and the interesting thing about it is that at the same time as I read some of his stuff, I'm like, but clearly your needs do matter because you're getting something out of this relationship. You're getting the opportunity to be of service to this person, and it fulfills you. So your needs do matter on some level to yourself and to her. You wouldn't still be there. It may seem odd, but it's an important distinction to make. Now, whether a person is consciously aware of it or not, that's a different thing. But I think that's important. But one of the other things that he pointed out and shared that I thought was fascinating is he said, mistress gets to make the final decision in this relationship. And he also said that she wants him to speak up and share feedback, that she wants to know what is like if he has concerns or things like that. So she makes the final decisions. She decides on the finances. She decides on other things. She is the one in charge. And nonetheless, he still gets a chance to offer feedback. So he does get to express something. It doesn't mean that she automatically agrees with it. It doesn't mean that he's centering himself. It means that he's nonetheless being heard. That there is a space for conversation. She still makes the decision. And there's still a space for conversation. You can kind of see why this is important. I think that one of the challenges that often occurs is that if we enter into an extreme of like, well, your needs don't matter, or this matters, or only these specific contexts can occur, we actually end up blocking out curiosity. And curiosity is, in my experience, the secret ingredient that keeps relationships alive. One of the activities that I like to do with my mistress is one that we've done since the very beginning of our relationship. It's called Question of the Day. Each day, we share a question with each other. I will say too that if you don't have this dynamic of curiosity in place, it changes the relationship. And I know this for a fact because for about a month or so, we went for a period where we went dry on the questions of the day. I was in a funk about some things in my life. We were in a long distance relationship. And so this is vitally important because if we don't have that question of the day, we're not necessarily connecting across space and time, i.e. two different countries and living far enough apart that we can't just see each other on a regular basis. We need that level of connection to be occurring. And if it's not occurring, it becomes a real challenge to the relationship. So recently I said to her, hey, let's get back into doing the question of the day. And she agreed. She's like, yeah, that's a good idea. We need to be doing that. And it changed the flavor of the relationship again, because we started asking questions each day. Get curious about the person that you're with. If the person you're with isn't curious about you, if they're not willing to have a conversation with you, if they're not open to discovering you, if they're not open to exploring like what your needs and wants are without necessarily saying yes, but just being willing to make the space for things to be heard, recognize that. Because a healthy relationship, regardless of what type of relationship it is, involves communication. And in my experience, kinky relationships actually call for more communication than less. If you're not having conversations, there's something fundamental that you're missing out on. So I think it's really important to have that component. And so what I think that I see, or what I observe, is that submissive men do want relationships. And a big part of the challenge is whether or not they're going to make the space to actually advocate for what they need. If I want to be in a relationship, that relational component is important. It's not just about the kink. It's got to be deeper than that. The kink is part of it, but a relationship solely based on desire is typically not going to last in the long run. A relationship that has some shared values, that has curiosity, that also and has space for the desires will last longer and could possibly last for a lifetime under the right circumstances. It all boils down to, can we connect with each other and be okay with each other? Can we have the tough and hard conversations? And sometimes those tough and hard conversations means being able to sit and talk about desires and needs and wants without necessarily acting on them, but being able to have the conversation. And the challenge that I see for a lot of submissive men is that they keep these desires to themselves because they're afraid of getting rejected. They're afraid that it won't be real. They're afraid that they will never really get what they want. So then they end up settling for relationships where they're not happy, but they put on the mask and they end up becoming codependent. And that's not the same thing as submission. Submission is a conscious choice. Codependency is not. It is unconscious patterning. So I'd be curious to hear what you guys think, if you have any ideas on this, what your thoughts are, and feel free to leave those in the comments below the video, and I'll read them and I'll respond to them. And thank you so much for being here.